I'm Jared McBride and it's story time. So why am I holding a flag here? Well, about 100 years ago we started celebrating Flag Day in this country. So why is there a special holiday for a flag? Well, the flag stands for more than just cloth and color. The flag stands for American ideals. It also is a symbol of hope that we can look to in times of trouble to energize us, to help us get what we need to get through. That's what our story's about today. So there's the American flag, and there's another flag that I'm going to talk about that was hanging from a U.S. warship about 200 years ago in the War of 1812. Now, a little background, the War of 1812 was of course fought in 1812, which is after the American Revolution. We had won our independence from Britain. We fought for it. We died for it. We bled for it. And we fought for it and we got it. We got the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And we were a country. 30 years later, the British were like, hey, are they serious about this? We're going to see. So they came back with their army and their navy, and they started chinking at the borders, and then they full on invaded. So they invaded Washington, D.C., burned the place to the ground, including the White House. On the high seas, the British Navy would pull up along American ships and kidnap all the sailors and force them to be British sailors. In the Great Lakes region, the armies came down from Canada, burned Buffalo, New York to the ground, and in Detroit, Michigan, they captured the fort and all 2,500 soldiers that were stationed at that fort. And the Great Lakes were completely dominated by the British Navy. Now, you can imagine this young country, our country, is in crisis here. We don't have a lot of resources. Our Navy only had 6 ships when the battle started, and the British had something like 400 ships. So the Navy, U.S. Navy, is like, we need to do something about this. So let's send somebody up to the Great Lakes, to Erie, Pennsylvania, to take care of business. So they sent one man, Oliver Hazard Perry. He was going to go and take command of the American forces on Lake Erie and kick some British butt. At least that's what he thought. But when he got there, he realized there was no American Navy. There were no American sailors. It was practically an empty lake, just with British warships floating around. So Perry had his battle flag with him, and it said something very important. His motto, his personal motto, which was, "Don't give up the ship." That's what he had when he carried his flag. And when he got there to the Ohio and he looked around, he's like, you know what? Other people might give up, but not me. I'm not going to give up this ship. I'm going to fulfill my commission. I'm going to take back the Great Lakes. So he went out immediately and started building alliances with people that he needed, like people that owned mills and people that were blacksmiths and lumberjacks and the local farmers, everyone that he could meet. Of course, they were very patriotic. A lot of them were either fought in the Revolutionary War or were direct descendants of those who had fought in the war. So they were very patriotic and willing to help the cause. So he built alliances with these people. So they looked out, and the Navy, instead of floating ships, they just had trees, green trees. They had to cut down the trees, they had to design the ships, they had to build the ships and launch the ships. And then to man these ships, all they had was farmers. So they had to train these farmers how to do knots and ropes, how to work together as a team, and how to run a Navy warcraft firing cannons. And about 6 months later is all it took him. And he put all this together and had his armada floating on Lake Erie. Now, they were still facing the greatest foe the world had ever seen on the waters. The British Navy, with its 400 warships, it wasn't just numerically superior, it was a superior navy in every way to every other country. Back for hundreds of years, from the Spanish Armada all the way to Trafalgar, They had won battle after battle after battle. Little battles, big battles. And they were something like 40-0. 40-0 by the time the Americans were facing them. Think of it, it's like a bunch of guys playing a pickup basketball game against the Golden State Warriors. Like, nobody has any chance to beat these people. But Perry, with his battle flag, that was ringing in his mind. He's like, don't give up the ship. It's like, I don't care if we're facing the British Navy. I don't care if we're facing the Golden State Warriors. I'm going to do my best to do my duty. So the day of the battle arrived, October 10th, 1813. Americans, freshly minted Navy, inexperienced but real go-getters. They were all in their ships, and they spotted the British Navy on the horizon, 6 hulking ships. And Perry rallies his crew. He says, there they are, let's get them. So the Americans turn their ships into the wind, and they're floating towards the British ships. But the British have longer range guns. So a little bit after noon, the Americans are slowly tacking, making their way towards these British ships, and the Brits open fire, and boom, this powerful barrage starts raining havoc on the decks of these American ships. They can see the smoke trailing out of these cannonballs, and they'd hit the deck and explode in flame and metal shards and hard splinters, hardwoods, flying around the ship, people getting injured and damaged immediately. And then boom, they see another cannonball on the deck, exploding, just knocking everything about. And the Americans, in order to be able to fight back, they had to withstand this barrage for half an hour, sailing slowly towards their date with destiny, to this decisive battle about who would control the Great Lakes. Finally, after half an hour, 30 minutes of this constant bombardment from these British ships, when Perry pulled up alongside, his ship was destroyed. It was completely unusable. None of the cannons were operational. His sails were in tatters, fires on the deck, and he looked around, almost in despair. What was he gonna do? The British were taunting him to surrender. Like, Perry, surrender to us. And he looks around. He's wondering, oh, is this all, what do I do? His gut-wrenching feelings. Do I just give up the ship now? Do I surrender to these British after all we've done? But my ship is destroyed. And then he pulled himself together. He had that Captain Kirk moment where it seems like everything is against him and everything's going wrong. And his eyes traced up the flagpole, and he saw his battle flag, his personal battle flag, waving in the breeze. Don't give up this ship. And from that moment, Perry knew what he was going to do. He looked around him, and he found that there was an undamaged battleship in his armada half a mile away. So he grabbed 4 able-bodied sailors, took a rowboat, put it in the water. He pulled down his battle colors, put them under his arm. They jumped into the rowboat, and they started rowing as fast as they could across this half-mile expanse of water. As soon as the British saw this, they were stunned. They started firing at him with their rifles. One of the rifles, bullets put a hole right under the waterline of this rowboat. It started gushing, filling in with this cold lake water. So Perry, being the commander, stood up on the edge of the rowboat and tilted it so the bullet hole was above the waterline. And he stood there proudly while his men rowed towards the other ship. As soon as he got there, he hoisted his colors, took command of the deck, rallied his men. They turned their ship and sailed it skillfully right between the 2 biggest British vessels. Once he pulled in there, he opened fire on both sides, fiery barrage, boom! And then within 15 minutes, the British surrendered to Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry. 15 minutes. Now, because of this decisive victory, he secured the northern border of the United States. He secured the entire Great Lakes region. That battle, along with the Battle of New Orleans in the south, settled our borders and gave us peace and prosperity for the last 200 years along these borders due to this victory. So I ask you, what are you going to do when your deck is strewn with bleeding and hurt sailors? When your gunpowder is aflame, when your sails are in tatters, it feels like impossible odds are pouring down upon you. Are you going to go belly up? Are you going to give in? Or are you going to look up, fix your gaze on that battle flag, don't give up the ship, and set your jaw and find your way through the obstacles? That's my hope for you. And for all of us, there's always some way through it. We can do this. We're Americans. Well, happy Flag Day. I'm dedicating this story to somebody who taught me about not quitting. My dad, Mike McBride. Now, just like Perry, when he showed up at the Great Lakes region, there was nothing for him. It's kind of like the way my dad came into this world. He lived in a farming community without a farm. He didn't have a lot to work with. But through his diligence and his efforts and his tenacity, he was able to build his little navy and build his little navy ships. Eventually, he went to school, was the first one to get a college education in his family. After that, he went to dental school and became a successful dentist, still practicing today. Along with my mother, he raised 8 children and now has a navy of grandchildren of his own. So thanks, Dad, for teaching me, don't give up the ship. Never surrender. Never retreat. Don't give up the ship. Love you, Dad. For the rest of you, happy Flag Day. And remember, don't give up the ship. Thank you for joining Storytime. I'm Jared McBride. Please subscribe. Also, I'm a loan officer in California. I'd love to help you with your next home loan. Contact me on my website, jaredmcbride.com.